Welcome to A Ride on the Outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
All right, here we are for episode 97 of the MMA Outsiders. Tom Albano along with Zain Bando. And Zain, do you remember? Because we are now officially in September. The summer is officially, well, not officially over yet, but we're on the downward track. It is almost over. Football season's here. We've got one more big UFC card next week before the summer officially closes up by way of the traditional, seasonal calendar. Fall is quickly approaching, and, it's been a little bit of a rough go for the UFC of late when it comes to their scheduling with the summer. 305 was definitely a better note, but we've got some fights this weekend, and Zain, this is the start of a pretty big stretch of events between UFC and PFL and Bellator and even boxing. So we are in a wild ride towards the end of the year.
Yeah, it definitely is a wild ride towards the end of the year, and to know that the UFC is going to have 3 events in the month of September and then not take a single other week off until Thanksgiving is pretty satisfying. To know that MMA will always be a part of the calendar in some regard, as well as combat sports with some major boxing fights coming up later in the month, which we'll get to at those appropriate times. But yeah, it's nice to see that after a little bit of a lull period or a dark period in the combat sports landscape, that things are starting to pick up, which means our show content is starting to pick up, and it's almost like as fate would have it, this is episode 97, and we are going to be previewing UFC Vegas 97 this week. Can you believe it? Can you believe it worked out that way?
Oh my God, I didn't even realize that. 97's all around. This is the 97 Club.
That's exactly right. Welcome to the 97 Club. And speaking to the MMA Outsiders, be sure to like and subscribe to the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. We just recently passed around 860 subscribers, so it would really help us out from an algorithm standpoint. Please like, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell, do whatever you have to do to get the word out. We would really appreciate it. And then, of course, for those of you listening on the audio-only platforms, you can listen to the show wherever you get your podcast. You can do so on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Premium, and so much more. And for those of you who are listening to us, please do the inverse and go back over to the YouTube site. Again, that's youtube.com/ETB Network. And of course, for more information about the network, including blogs from some of our contributors, you can go to etbpodcast.com and find all of the great NFL work that our good colleague Grant Winsauer is putting out. He's the host of the new short video series Grant's Game Day, which is going to be ramping up with the start of the NFL season here with this week. So shout out to him. And of course, since we're getting back into a regular schedule, you'll be seeing more MMA content pop up on the site as well. Tom, would you like to do the playback honors now?
Yes. So, of course, the MMA Outsiders and everything here at the Empty the Bench Podcast Network is presented by Playback. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETV Network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. Just the other night, we had a fantasy football draft. Yes, 10 people from the ETV network in front of the camera and behind the scenes took part in a fantasy draft in which, we're going to have a fantasy league. We're going to play through all the weeks of this season with a special prize for whoever finishes in last place. And, well, Zain, you and I are going to be squaring off in the first week, so this should be fun. Bragging rights are completely on the line. I'm curious to see how my team drafted. Yeah, considering I drafted and I managed to get Christian McCaffrey with the second overall pick, takes on your team in which you drafted Patrick Mahomes in the first round.
Yeah, so it should be a banger matchup. So bragging rights are on the line in regards to our fantasy matchup. Picks records are on the line. Roasts are on the line. There's a lot on the line this week. It should be fun.
Zain, even producer Pat and one of the other MMA hosts on here, Anthony Ballister, they're facing off in the first week of the season.
Yeah, so the entire combat team pretty much is facing each other. So it should be a very fun week and a very fun NFL
season. Actually, Zain, there's a little more because next week, since we're mentioning UFC 306, there is time and place to be determined. But next week we will manage to get in Fight Study for the pay-per-view card, obviously, again. And then this coming Thursday night, NFL kickoff, baby. Chiefs, Ravens, watch along.
Yeah, it should be fun, which means the NFL season is just days away. So anyone who's interested in any of the fall sports content, please be sure to check all of that out. And I'm very excited to bring back Fight Study for the third consecutive pay-per-view. That'll obviously be exclusively on Playback. So thanks to everyone who tuned in there. And I think we're going to have a very kind of special edition with Fight Study. We've been talking behind the scenes, and we might dissect what was the controversial draw between Alexa Grasso and Valentina Shevchenko. But more information on that to come for the time being. For now, we have a few major topics to get into and a bit of a lighter episode of episode 97 here, but I'm excited to officially get started.
Yeah, and Zain, for this, so the first three topics here kind of go under one umbrella. So I even gave that umbrella its own little banner here, and that is what the hell is going on with the UFC's December pay-per-view? Because everything the last couple of weeks has exploded, and that there could be several potential options, which I did advocate for, if you remember about the whole Conor Chandler aim for December. Like, well, you need options. Well, those options now have their own difficulties about them. So let's start on the Conor Chandler end. So in the last 2 weeks, we have seen Conor McGregor throw out some cryptic tweets, basically alongside training footage saying, he wants to be free. Be free from what? I mean, he didn't exactly say, but when we have talked about the difficulties with negotiating with between Conor and the UFC, it is noted that Conor has 2 fights left on his contract. Michael Chandler just dropped a couple of teasing tweets recently. One saying, one talking about betting on yourself, and then one basically saying, "Hey, you're gonna hear something from me soon." And then Uncle Chael, Zain. Uncle Chael got into the mix very recently. Chael Sonen, in a video that was published, I believe, on Sunday, basically insinuating that the UFC still wants to do Conor versus Chandler from what he's heard, but it would not be in December in Las Vegas. According to Chael, from how did you describe him before we went on the air? What kind of sources?
He said he said something the lines of one of my sources he said one of my sources whom I trust very much, who's in the know, like some anonymous source that he considers some.
I know. I was trying to get you to do the Chael Sonnen impersonation.
Yeah.
Basically claiming somebody on the inside that he knows says the UFC's aim is to not do Conor Chandler in December, but to do it in January as the first pay-per-view of 2025, not in Las Vegas, but in sunny California.
Yeah, which could only mean it would take place in one spot in California, and that's Anaheim, given the UFC's exclusive deal. So
that is true. The TKO deal with the arena, but Zain, a lot to make of this. So I don't know what angle or what your thoughts are, any of this are, what angle you want to attack it from, but these are the updates at this point for this fight.
Sure. So first, I'm just going to say that this is shocking. Number one, and number two, you got to take everything that Chael Sonnen says with a grain of salt, because sometimes he says things that are completely out of his ass, and then some other times he'll say things and he's like 80% right. So you don't fully know. But to me, we were talking about this before getting on the air earlier today, is the fact that Conor McGregor mainly only fights in Las Vegas. I mean, minus COVID, where he fought Dustin Poirier in Abu Dhabi. he's essentially competed only in Vegas. The last time he wasn't in Vegas, not including COVID, was when he fought Dennis Seaver in January of 2015. In January of 2015. So it's been quite a while. That's number one. And number two, I just don't understand how you couldn't do a McGregor fight in Las Vegas. I mean, as someone who's been to a Conor McGregor fight in Las Vegas firsthand, I can't tell you how many billboards of Conor that I saw while I was there. I couldn't tell you how many people that were in Vegas just to be in the atmosphere of McGregor versus Poirier 3, not necessarily going to the fight. Obviously, a bunch of them did, but most people were there, in the atmosphere, the bright lights in Las Vegas. And this is no disrespect to Anaheim, California, but I just don't think that you can get that fanfare in California the same way you would do in Vegas. And just the economics of it, and the controversy of, when, the UFC was, going to try to hold events in California over COVID, and the governor shut it down. Like, well, I don't know if there's still a bit of a stinker from any of that, if you will, but I just don't understand how you could do a Conor McGregor fight in California when Vegas is right there. So
yeah, I really don't know, because like you said, we haven't seen much of Conor McGregor anywhere in Las Vegas. Actually, I will correct you, because Conor McGregor versus Eddie Alvarez took place in New York City after the Dennis Seaver fight. So
yeah, you're right. That's true. Thank you for the correction. Yeah.
But even after
you get my point, though.
Right. We have commonly associated Conor McGregor and Las Vegas hand in hand, going together like peanut butter and jelly. We have rarely seen Conor McGregor fight outside of Las Vegas. Even after the whole thing happened with Khabib Nurmagomedov, and Conor was so pissed and tweeted that he would never fight in Las Vegas ever again. Then, ever since then, the only time he has not fought in Las Vegas was when the UFC had to do Fight Island because of COVID. We were in the middle of the pandemic era of fights. Right. So I really don't know what to make of all of this, because like I mentioned last week, Sam, when we did our mini-sode, the fact that you've got two title fights now potentially being targeted for UFC 310, be it Bilal Muhammad defending the welterweight championship, and whatever's going on with this lightweight title situation with Arman Tsarukyan, an injured Islam Makhachev, if an interim title is going to be inserted here with Dan Hooker and company. I mean, the fact that they're looking at two potential title fights for December, whether it be one of the two or both, tells me McGregor ain't fighting in December. But are you really, I guess, Zan, are you really going to put this off another month? After all of the headaches, after all of the frustration trying to get this fight off the ground one way or another, be it all the stuff with Tough and all the negotiating, the pullout, weeks before, like, are we really going to continue on with this? Why? I get why, but I get why.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels that way. And to piggyback off of what you just said, I just don't understand. Like I get it. It would be a banner start to the 2025 UFC calendar.
That's my only thing. I guess, it has 2020, the second half of their 2024, calendar. Has it just been such a what show since the McGregor Chandler canceling, or you could even say after UFC 300 and say more than just the second half, that at this point they would rather just focus on getting 2025 off to a hot start?
I mean that can be an angle, but to me, I don't understand how you can't end the year with the sport's biggest star when you have supposedly the pound for pound best fighter in the world headlining
Madison Square Garden, yeah,
headlining Madison Square Garden. Like, I just don't understand that the UFC. Just to me, I feel like putting two and two together and having Jones and McGregor headline back-to-back cards to end 2024, to me, makes all the sense in the world. Because if you think about it from the other side of things, the Bilal Muhammad versus Shavkat Rakhmonov and or Kamaru Usman fight is always going to be there, and Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan fight is always going to be there. We don't know what McGregor Chandler's futures are if this fight doesn't even happen. So I think the UFC. I think it's more. I was just going to say.
Actually, I'm going to let you finish your point.
Okay. I was just going to say, well, I think the UFC should be more concerned about timing than anything else, because if they push this another month and this thing gets canceled again, it's never being rescheduled. So
I mean, Zan, there are people who are already, and myself included, that are already sick and tired of this and don't even want to see it, especially after the announcement from Dana about 3 or 4 weeks ago at the conclusion of the first Dana White Contender Series, saying that Conor is not fighting in 2024. And it's like, why are we continuing to put this off? Zan, we are at the point now, Puncher's Chance talked about it. We're talking about, I've mentioned it. At this point, if Chandler wants to do something ASAP, if Chandler still wants to maintain some sort of title contention ASAP, it would have to be time to move off the Conor McGregor fight. But at the same time, then he's getting away from a potential payday. It's a lose-lose situation for Michael Chandler. It's a lose-lose situation for the UFC. The only one who it's not affected by anything at this point maybe is Conor McGregor. Maybe you can say it affects the legacy, but at this point, if he never fights ever again, can you really say that?
No, but would it affect Michael Chandler's legacy? Absolutely, because he's always going to be known as the guy that, sat on the sidelines and waited and waited and waited and waited for his opportunity instead of trying to remain active, which I get it. It's no fault of his own. He wants the biggest payday in the world, and we could have our gripes about it. And obviously, I'm never going to be a professional fighter. You're never going to be a professional fighter.
No.
But if I was in that situation, I feel like I would want to stay as active as possible to show that I'm still one of the best lightweights in the world. And Elmer was not willing to do that. And again, I don't fully blame him from the financial aspect. But if this fight ever happens, and I'm going to say this on record, the only person that he can blame for this is truly himself. Because
I don't blame him for 2023. He and Conor coached tough. When you sign contracts to coach tough, you have to do everything. You have to wait for the season to air on television. They were, for most of 2023, he couldn't do anything. It was after 2020, like the second half. Actually, no, the last quarter of 2023 on. Yeah, that's where you can blame Chandler.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean to just continue to add to this, like, I just think overall, like, you kind of mentioned a second ago, like, if this fight happens and the fight, doesn't live up to expectation or whatever, will we always look back on it and say, man, did we really waste 3 years of our lives talking about a fight that ended up just being absolutely terrible? We obviously don't know how the fight's going to go if the fight happens, but to me, we could be looking at a situation where at the very end of this whole thing, we'll be sitting there scratching our heads going, what in the world were we thinking the last 3 years? So I don't know. I mean, go ahead. I'm
going to go a step further, San. I've talked about it before. I'll go a step further here again. And if Michael Chandler loses to Conor McGregor somehow after all this, the only option at this point, you're so damaged, your legacy and everything, you got to retire.
Yeah, you're probably right. And
I still say, Zan, I still say loser of this fight, like this is WWE style, loser leaves town. Whoever loses this fight, if this fight happens, needs to go.
Yeah, I could see that too. So I guess given everything we know, taking this, at the face value that it is, do you think this fight happens on January 18th? Do you think it happens December 7th, or do you not think it happens at all?
December 7th for nothing at all.
Okay, so you think that it has to happen in 2024?
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I guess that leads me to my next question. When do you think we're going to get the announcement that people have just been waiting weeks and weeks and months for with this rescheduled date?
Next week Dana has tried to make a very big deal of the Sphere, and that Sphere card, I mean, it's weak. It hasn't sold out yet. The tickets are expensive. The Boxing Kingdom's trying to claim that, the UFC, and you kind of iterated in one of your blog posts, the UFC has kind of failed, when it comes to trying to overtake Canelo. Do you think maybe if everything bad that's going on with the Sphere, Dana announces it at the end of the Sphere card in the post-fight press conference?
I could very well see a slip in very similar to after UFC 300, yeah, or after or was the after you
After 300, yeah.
Yeah, because that's when he announced the Islam Makhachev Dustin Poirier fight in the same announcement. Yep. Yeah.
So there is that potential.
I could see it. To me, this whole January California mix just doesn't sit right with me, considering what you said at the very beginning of this discussion, which was, Conor McGregor and Las Vegas going hand in hand. So I'm still going to go out on a limb and say that this fight happens. We're just going to have to sit and wait with bated breath to see when it will actually occur. And you had mentioned a great point too, because, it just got revealed in a press release the other day. You got this major Riyadh season UFC event in Saudi Arabia in February. I feel like an angle of that sort could still come into play, or because in time we would be kidding ourselves if we didn't think that Riyadh season would want to be involved in this fight one way or another, right? Because they've got to want to be, right.
That's true. That still could get in the mix. You know what I've talked about with the Saudi money coming in on either the UFC side or the PFL side or the boxing side. When they're involved, they want the biggest fights happening. So that's ultimately where we're at with this. But since you're going to bring that up, let's go to the other angle, one of the two other angles. Let's go to that angle, because Arman Tsarukyan has announced that he is not going to do his PSA anymore. That the whole thing about the 9-month suspension could be reduced to 6 with the PSA. He's not going to do it because Islam Makhachev is not going to be fighting a UFC 308 due to the injury, which we've discussed weeks ago here on our show. So At this point now, he's thinking it's either going to be UFC 310 or at some point at the start of 2025. Now, considering it was originally, I think, a 9-month suspension. So April 13th, so May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, January 13th. I believe the aim date, Zan, for UFC 311, the first pay-per-view of 2025. Yeah, January 18th. So that would put that card into play as well as the Saudi Arabia card into play. So it would make sense, I guess, for him to hold on a bit. But my question at this point, Zan, is, does the UFC have a plan that is it going to go with the welterweight title route at 310 and they just wait for Islam to be healed and do Islam versus Arman in Saudi Arabia? Is there a plan for Arman to fight in Saudi Arabia, even if the worst case scenario, Islam's still not ready? And let's imagine, Zan, Conor Chandler happens in January. We wouldn't put it past. I wouldn't put it past the UFC, but are you really going to do 2 big cards in a 3-week span? Because the Riyadh season calendar came out. They're thinking of February 1st, Saturday, February 1st, the weekend before the Super Bowl, for the UFC next card in Saudi Arabia, which puts a pay-per-view idea out there. I mean, we saw 285 and 286, and Jon Jones and Leon Edwards, Kamaru Usman 3 happen in a 2 weeks apart from one another. Could they do that here?
I mean, same. You could say a similar thing about UFC 267 and 268. Those turnarounds were from Abu Dhabi to Madison Square Garden. So
yeah, the pay-per-views the rest of this year are 3 weeks apart.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't think February's out of the question. I mean, I think Arman Tsarukyan headlining in Saudi Arabia makes the most sense, just considering, where he's from. And you try to have, 2 Middle Eastern fighters in the main event of those cards, or at least one half of the main event be Middle Eastern. So, yeah, I could see that. But the big question mark, or the conundrum, if you will, that the UFC might run into is if a massive injury occurs between UFC 311 and what we're presuming would be UFC 312, they're going to be in a bad heap. So
that's the other thing, because we talked about it last week with these two fights, these two title fights. You have some wiggle room for 311 and 312, but as you mentioned, one injury or one bad Conor McGregor negotiation, everything falls apart. Do you have a plan D? Like, is Alex Pereira, if he gets past Khalil Roundtree in October, going to be available to fill in on one of these cards? I don't know what you do at this point.
Well, knowing Pereira's activity, he would probably say yes. So,
well, you're going to have to hope he and the UFC hates this guy. Well, Dana at least hates this guy, but Magomed Ankalaev, you got to hope they both come out of October unscathed at this point.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you guys can't already tell, there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of other divisions that are directly tied to lightweight. Where if one of these fights does not play out a certain way, it's a domino effect for the rest of the calendar. So it's just extremely fascinating. I mean, my main opinion on this is, I think Tsarukyan is doing the right thing by sitting out. Like, what's the point of it? Him doing the PSA if Islam Makhachev is not going to be ready. If he was going to be ready, 1,000% you do it. But
if he was offered by the UFC to do December, then he would do the PSA, I would assume. But at this point, that would be
my assumption too.
But like you said, at this point, it would only make sense to have Arman be one of the headliners for the Saudi Arabia card on February 1st, if that indeed is going to be a pay-per-view and not a fight night.
I would assume so, considering that Turki Al-Sheikh did tease at the end of the June show that he wants to bring a bigger card to Saudi Arabia. So I think all systems go and all signs point to a pay-per-view being a possibility. What do you think?
I think so too. It wouldn't shock me at this point. Abu Dhabi gets a pay-per-view year after year. Saudi's probably going to want one too.
So if you would, so just to kind of tie a bow on this all together, when do you think Arman Tsarukyan fights? And I'm going to give my prediction first. But what do you think on September 3rd at the time that this is airing? Who do you think headlines UFC 310, and why do you think that?
I am gonna go. I really don't care so much for Conor Chandler, but just I'm trying to imagine what happens at this point in December. Well, here's the other question. If one of these, let's say something happens on this December card and one of the fights has to move, one of those two fights has to move to December, then what happens to one of these other pay-per-views? And number two, since we're talking about Conor, do you remember when he got stripped of the featherweight championship, when all the dominoes fell when it came to, I think, trying to book Cormier Johnson 2 the first time?
That's right. Yeah, I remember that.
Could you see something happen where if Islam's not ready for the start of 2025, that potentially he gets stripped of a championship for injury and just to make something fit? Or they do some sort of BS interim title involving Arman and Dan Hooker like we talked about?
What I don't remember about that whole thing is what it had to do with Conor's what did it do with Conor?
Because Conor was inactive at featherweight, so they put the title back on Aldo. They made Holloway Pettis the interim title fight.
That's right. Yeah. Now,
so my question is, if something like that happens with Conor, and Islam's not ready to go for January, February, does the UFC strip Islam of the lightweight championship to get something going for December, or they do some sort of BS interim title like we talked about with potentially Arman and Hooker? What do you do at that point?
I think that's good. That's good you asked. I think Islam would get a little bit of leeway just considering he fought in June and it would have not been a year of inactivity. See with Conor, if you remember, he never defended the featherweight championship, and the UFC waited until essentially the year was up. Because if you think about it, UFC 206 was in December. And then they obviously stripped him. I think with Islam, it's a little bit of a different scenario, considering that he just defended the lightweight title in June. So that's the only caveat that I would put on that. What do you think?
I can sort of see that, especially because I think the UFC has some big plans. They have some bright hopes for Islam, especially with being the face of their Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia pay-per-views. So
I just don't know. The big issue that I have, Tom, and I don't know if you agree with this. I just don't know if Arman in this stage of his career is willing to take an interim title fight that he probably doesn't feel like he needs to take because he's the rightful number one contenders. So he's probably thinking, what's the point of me taking an interim title fight when I can just sit out and wait? But I do think if the UFC needs a backup plan to the backup plan, I think you do Hooker versus Tsarukyan for the interim title, and the winner fights Islam if they really wanted to pull the trigger on that.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, Arman's not completely against an interim title fight, as far as I know. But I'm going to, for the sake of trying to prevent madness and have a stronger end to the year, as much as I don't care for Conor Chandler at this point, I think Conor Chandler December. I think whatever's going on with the welterweight title, we'll talk about it in January. February, you have, hopefully Islam's ready, you do Islam Arman.
See, this is where I sort of disagree with you, and this is an angle that I don't think a lot of people are hinting at. I think it's going to be Dricus du Plessis for December versus the winner of Whittaker versus Chimaev, and I think that the whole South Africa talk is just hearsay at this point because until they have an arena, I don't think they can do that.
I understand from that point, but over Sean Strickland, who has said on the record he will not fight again until he gets a rematch.
I'm sorry. That's who I meant to say. It's going to be Dricus versus one of those three guys, no matter how it plays out.
And then maybe the winner of Whittaker Chimaev, which we'll talk about in a little bit, faces the winner of Dricus versus Strickland.
100%, yes.
I could buy that.
See, now, I think they go to Dricus as a last resort if they can't figure any of this other stuff out. That's what. Here's
$1 million. We need a fight.
Mm-hmm. And he would take it.
Probably, yeah. But now let's talk about the welterweight title line, because even that one's become a little murky. Because now the assumption is that Belal would face Shavkat Rakhmonov because the top of the welterweight division, let's face it, Zain, is a little weak. Leon Edwards lost to Belal clearly, and the UFC, because of the bad nature of that card, does not want to do the trilogy fight. Kamaru Usman's lost twice. Colby Covington had one of the worst fights I think I've ever seen in the UFC when he challenged Leon. That leaves Shavkat Rakhmonov, who last win comes over Stephen Wonderboy Thompson as the potential title challenger. And now all of a sudden Kamaru Usman is in the mix here. So I'm actually glad we talked about this last, because now I threw out a couple of weeks ago, Zain, the idea of maybe Charles Oliveira still being in the mix for an interim title thing. If Kamaru Usman gets a title shot after all of this inactivity, coming off 2 consecutive losses, then nobody should come to me and say Charles Oliveira getting an interim title fight should be a bad idea. I'm sorry. Where is Kamaru Usman getting into all of this? There's no reason for Kamaru Usman to be getting a title shot now just because Dana hates Belal.
Well, I'm going to have to disagree with you. I think there's only one reason why Kamaru Usman would even be remotely considered in getting a title shot is because he's exactly that. He's the former UFC welterweight champion, and he's a name. That's the only reason for me to believe that Kamaru Usman is even remotely in this discussion at this point. That's what.
Then you can't take Charles Oliveira out of an interim lightweight title discussion.
No, I don't know. I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying that's probably the narrative the UFC is going to try to push if they make that.
And I think that's a big. I understand why Usman would take him, why the UFC would want to do that, but that's a big risk. Usman loses a fight with Belal. That's 3 straight losses, 2 of them being title fights in pretty bad fashion. That's not a good look.
Yeah, and it's also not fair to Shavkat, who's undefeated. So
under normal circumstances, I think Shavkat should have to wait one more fight, because Stephen Wonderboy Thompson does not in 2024 does not indicate to me ready for the next level. But what's going on at welterweight? The welterweight division's kind of weak. I would like to see Shavkat Rakhmonov, and I was on record saying when he knocked out Wonderboy, I'd like to see Rakhmonov face Colby Covington. But now rumor has it, potentially, that if Dustin Poirier's last fight is non-title and outside of lightweight, Covington could be the opponent. So everything at welterweight at this point is a big question mark.
See, I'd like to see. This might sound controversial, but I would love to see Usman fight Ian Gary. That's the fight. That's the
I
fight.
don't think that's controversial.
See, I sort of kind of do because then all the purists would say, "Oh, why is a former champion fighting an up and comer?" That's the other side.
I get it, but coming off 2 losses, hasn't fought in a year, like some of Usman's aura is gone to me. It's not all of it, but some of it is.
I don't disagree, and I think that head kick really changed things in the worst way possible because he has not been the same fighter since that. So,
no, absolutely not.
Do you think the UFC will go the purist route and give Shavkat a title shot, or do you think they'll try to pull this Usman thing?
I think it's going to be to Shavkat because, right, like I said, the welterweight division's kind of weak, and I think Shavkat, at least in Dana's eyes, might be the best chance that he has of getting a win over Bilal and becoming a champion.
Because if you look at the current UFC rankings in the welterweight division, you are probably right. I mean, if you look at it, you've got Shavkat, you've got JDM, you've got Colby Covington, you've got Gilbert Burns, we're going to talk about in a little bit. He's fighting the number 8th ranked guy in the world in Sean Brady, and you got Stephen Wonderboy Thompson down at number 9. I mean, to me, I just don't understand, and you probably agree. I don't understand from a media standpoint, given where Usman's at in his career, and you probably agree with me. How in the world is Usman at this point in his career ranked higher than Shavkat? That's the part that doesn't make sense to me. I think if you're going to do anything, you flip that.
At this point, Sam, it seems like the rankings don't matter. Khalil Roundtree's getting a title shot. Usman's being considered for a title shot off 2 losses. Nothing.
Shoot. I think that Jack Dillon and Aleda versus Shavkat, who should be the next fight. But of course the UFC is not going to do that because they're more than likely worried that JDM might beat him. That's probably why. But yeah, I'm going to agree with you and say that Shavkat gets the Bilal fight, which you better believe, given the UFC's international appeal and the way they're trying to push some of these international stars, that to me, even though Dana admitted that Bilal did his thing, you just know that there's just some sort of inkling that something between Bilal and the UFC just doesn't mix. Almost like they're disappointed that he's the welterweight champion, and that's the sad part.
Right, because Zan, the reality of the situation is, they're doing this because they don't like Bilal. Because the real answer, Zan, is they needed to do the trilogy fight, but they don't want to do it. And I understand because the fight was crap and the whole card of that was crap, but that would have been the only way to prevent this welterweight was a trilogy fight.
Well, right. And the UFC was probably worried that the same thing would happen in fight 3 as what happened in fight 2. So
yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about Dana White and rankings for a second, Zan, because going on a 12 or so minute rant at the last Contender Series press conference because somebody in the media dared to ask.
Alex Bahunin did. Alex Bahunin from MMA Mania as a joke. He said it in like a joking, mocking manner, and it caused this whole ruckus between Bahunin and Kevin Iole and Dana. It was madness.
Alex, come on, you know better than that.
Unreal. Okay, so can you kind of break down this, and for the people that have been living under a rock that maybe didn't see it?
If you've heard one rant of Dana White in this topic, you've heard it all. Because Alex, like you said, asked him joking, do you still think Jon Jones is the greatest pound-for-pound fighter in the world? And Dana went back on his glazing ways, because of course he did. And then Kevin Iole, despite the fact they had a whole discussion in a recent video interview,
2 weeks ago,
they got on the same conversation about, does activity matter? What about Islam? What about Alex? It just, my head hurts from this.
Me too. So I guess okay, let me just break it down in parts, because there are some things that Dana said that are absolutely justified, okay? But okay. let me debunk Dana a little bit too. When he said that Islam Makhachev beat Alexander Volkanovski in a fight that a lot of people thought that Volk won, including myself. What Dana fails to mention, because it's technically something that would go against his argument, is that Islam eventually finished Alexander Volkanovski the next time they fought. Does
the short notice nature of that second fight have anything to? Does that?
I don't think so because they still fought. Volk could have not. Volk just said no. I'm not going to be ready. I'm not going to be ready in 14 days. You could easily. He said that they could have moved on. My point in saying this is to me, you can't justify the word activity when someone was supposed to fight and got injured. That to me, injuries mean inactivity. Now, activity, and I think that's something that Kevin was trying to push back on him very much about. But I do think there are aspects of Dana's argument that to me are just simply flawed. Another thing I'd like to add to this too is when Dana mentioned the point how, oh, am I just going to leave Stipe high and dry and go tell him to F off or whatever? Think about all the other times where the UFC had a rematch or a big fight right in their grasp, and they didn't do it for some stupid reason. You know it better than anyone. But now in this case, in this scenario, because it's this quote unquote legacy fight between two guys who barely fight now. Well, let's be honest. This is no disrespect to Jon Jones at all, but he barely fights now. And Stipe Miocic's last win was 4 years ago. How can you justify to me, outside of maybe 10% of the MMA community? How can you justify to me that this is the fight that needs to be made at this point in time when you're active interim champion who just recently turned 31, 32 years old is sitting on the shelf for no reason?
And Zain, I'm gonna be on the. I was on the record before, but I don't know if you saw one of Jon Jones's recent tweets about he doesn't think he needs to fight Aspinall for his legacy. I'm still holding to the point to the take I made months ago. I think Jon's retiring after the Stipe fight.
I'm gonna go the opposite of you, and I think it is a disservice to Tom Aspinall and the rest of the heavyweight division, to be quite frank, if the interim heavyweight champion is not given the opportunity to unify the belts. I just think based on merit that's 100% wrong. But I understand the point of what you're saying in regards to that Jones doesn't think he needs to fight Aspinall, but what happened to? I guess my counterpoint to that would be what happened to the synergy of finishing the divisional pecking order.
Well, that's Zain. That's not my take. I think he should fight both Stipe and Aspinall because I think that would be so. I would solidify. I'm saying Jones thinks he does not need to fight Aspinall, which I kind of disagree. I actually do understand a little bit of the Jones Stipe thing, as much as, you know, it's not the greatest fight in the world. But if he's fighting Stipe, I agree with you that he should give Aspinall the opportunity in 2025 to fight.
Okay, so we agree on that. It's just a little bit. It's just a little bit of the fact of it's the way that he's going about it is where we might slightly differ just a little.
It's the way he's going about it, and more than that, it's the way Dana White is going about everything. Because I've also been on the record that I think we're getting, or at least Dana is getting, this whole thing about pound for pound. He thinks, Zain, that pound for pound has to deal with legacy and everything else, which isn't fair. One, it's not exactly the correct definition. Two, it isn't fair to everybody else because, Zain, Jon Jones is from a different generation of MMA fighters. He is from the 2010s era. How many fighters at this point do we have left from the early 2010s, late 2000s? We don't have much at this point.
We really don't have any outside of him. Maybe a couple others that are not champions.
So Jon Jones. So my question then to Dana. So Jon Jones should stay number one, and not give anybody else an opportunity just because he's been around for so long. That's kind of a BS lame excuse.
Yeah, and to add on to that too, where Dane is misconstruing himself too, is he's mixing pound for pound best fighter in the world with the greatest of all time.
Greatest of all time. I
right.
don't. Those two things should not. Those two should be mutually exclusive to one another. You can't mix both.
100%. Because do you think that Jon Jones is the greatest fighter of all time? Because I do personally. What do you?
I do. Again, I was on the record. I talked about this, I think, 2 weeks ago, Zain. I think we're at a point now after Jon, regardless of what you thought of Ciryl Gane, regardless of the fact that Francis Ngannou left, when Jon Jones won the heavyweight title, you're in two camps at this point. If you think that outside the cage factor should affect GOAT status, you're going to go GSP. If you don't, it's Jon Jones. I don't think there's any way about it. That's my take.
I don't think so either. And speaking of on the record, I've been well on the record of saying that I can separate both of those things. But from my particular point of view, I do think that Jones is the greatest fighter of all time. But pound for pound best fighter in the world right now, not even close. To me, and this may be a bit of a hot take. To me, I don't even think he should be top 5 right now. I really don't, because him fighting once in the last 40 years and him fighting, and this is no disrespect to Ciryl Gane, but the UFC likes to paint this narrative that Ciryl Gane is the best heavyweight in the world. He was not the best heavyweight in the world when Jon fought him. Everybody knows this. Everybody knows this. Everybody knows that.
And, I've been on the record that I think with what Pereira has done in the last year plus, outside of, getting finished by Israel Adesanya in a fight that he clearly, I thought, won the first round. Right now, I think Alex Pereira is the best fighter in the world at this point when it comes to the pound for pound ranking. But I'm not going to put Alex Pereira or Islam Makhachev above Jon Jones and the GOAT. I'm not that crazy. But at the same time, I think those two have done, I know Dana was moaning and crying about these people, which, by the way, UFC ranking people, we've talked about the UFC ranking people, about how questionable their integrity and credibility are. But when
half of them don't even cover the sport anymore. That's the crazy part.
Everyone, he's crying and moaning and bitching about Islam and Pereira being ranked above Jon in the pound for pound. No, I think that's right.
Yeah, I think so too. Although I would slightly disagree with you. I would rank Islam number 1 and Alex number 2, but I could see it the other way too.
So this is just craziness. I'm sorry. This is so stupid.
I mean, what do you think now the narrative is going to turn to if he beats? Is he going to stay on his high horse and say that Jon Jones, in his opinion, is still the best pound for pound fighter in the world? Because to me, I think he totally will.
Yeah, he's going to go all in on this, And Zain, imagine he goes all in on this and then Stipe knocks him out in the first 2 rounds of the fight.
Could you imagine? So wait a minute. So if that miracle ups at some way happens, the only reason why I'm saying miracle was because I don't think the Vegas betting insiders were giving Stipe much of a chance. Considering how long he's been out. But let's just take your scenario for a second. Let's say that Stipe actually wins. What is he gonna say then?
That Stipe Miocic is the greatest of all time.
Which to me at that point, he's not even worth listening to, because if you compare Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic's resume side by side, even with Jones potentially listening to Stipe, you can't compare them. So
you know what? Actually, on second thought, no, he'll still say John's the GOAT. He'll just call Stipe Miocic the greatest heavyweight that there has ever been.
So, do you think even if Stipe loses, do you think he's the number 2 best heavyweight of all time? What do you think?
Wait, are you talking about Stipe or Jon? I'm confused.
No, I'm saying, do you think even if Stipe loses to Jones, do you think he's the top 2 heavyweight of all time in
all time?
In MMA.
I think he is one of the greatest heavyweights, simply because we haven't seen a lot of stability with heavyweight with the UFC. Nobody defended it 3 consecutive times until Stipe Miocic came along, and the fact that he's won the belt twice. If he manages to win the belt the 3rd time in miracle fashion, he's got to be in that conversation.
I mean, let's just be honest here. Like, do you think? I think there's only one way for Stipe to win, and it's before round 3, assuming the fight happens. is I think the
Yeah.
longer the fight goes, the less it favors him. What do you think?
I can buy that. I completely buy it. I can completely buy that.
And one other additional thing, because we were talking earlier about stripping titles and stuff like that. We're talking about guys, being stripped that just fought 6, 7, 8 months ago.
I know where you're going with this, Zan. I know where you're going with this, and I'll reiterate the point I said earlier this year. Not earlier this year, at the end of actually at the start of last month.
Okay.
I know the UFC doesn't do mandatories, but I think you've got to have Aspinall's the mandatory backup fighter. You tell Jones Stipe.
Well, no, partially that, but another point that I was going to make too is we're talking about champions being stripped and stuff, and we're talking about being in for a year. We're so fixated on inactivity. Why has Jon Jones not been stripped to the heavyweight title yet? So
I completely agree on that, and it's funny how MMA Twitter acts sometimes, Sam, because they're crying and moaning about Jones and everything, but then when Islam Makhachev goes and gets injured against Dustin Poirier, they're crying about him getting stripped too. It's like, make it make sense.
And also pick a lane, because if it's just a favoritism lane, it's not a fair argument. So
no. All right, we spent too much time on this. Let's go to something else. Let's quickly, before we preview this weekend's fights, Zan, Alexander Volkov, Ciryl Gane, they put out a little teaser video, and the UFC put in there that, it's the UFC 308 co-main event, and everyone's like, wait a minute. You just said Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev was the co-main event. And the UFC corrected itself, deleted tweet, and said, Whittaker Chimaev is the co-main event. But now that's got people wondering. I mean, Zan, I mentioned it last week. The betting odds actually favor Chimaev pulling out of the fight over this fight happening. And now that's got everybody's questioning again. Is this fight are we actually going to see Khamzat Chimaev fight?
I'm going to say on September 3rd, 2024, at what would be like somewhere it'll pass 4 p.m. Eastern when it starts. I'm going to say right here, right now, that this fight gets canceled again, and I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you why. The UFC making this mistake, whoever decided to make the mistake, whether it was
something's going on, I know where you're going with this. Something's going on.
Well, something's going on. Number one, and number two, how can you, and to add to that too, how can you tweet that, leave it up for 3 hours? As if everything is status quo normal and deleted. So yes, number one, something's going on, and number two, this is just the nature of the situation. We had similar stuff happen with Sabit. We had similar stuff happen with the Ferguson Khabib fight that was canceled 5 times. I'm going to go on in a limb and say, and I can eat crow if the fight happens, but I'm going to go on in a limb and say that we will never for as long as we do this show, we will never see this particular fight happen. This fight will never happen.
I'm going to agree with you. I don't think the UFC makes that mistake and leaves it up that long unless they know something is questioning about Whittaker or Chimaev. And if it is Chimaev again, I mean, Zan, I talked about it when it came to what Israel Adesanya's future is, and you kind of mentioned, Dricus versus Strickland being a backup plan for one of these cards, whether it be Conor Chandler or the start of next year. If Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev falls off, and it's the fault of Khamzat Chimaev, with all Whittaker has done and still being the quadruple A fighter that we talk about, Sam, I feel like at that point you're going to have to guarantee Whittaker the winner of Dricus Strickland.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. And then there's the other side of the coin where people probably don't think that Chimaev even deserves Whittaker given his UFC resume so far. So there's also
it's a great resume on paper, but you consider the inactivity, the try to retire ones, the UFC September a couple of years ago debacle where he missed weight and didn't seem to care.
Right. It seems like just one domino effect after another. They just can't seem to get it right. It's pretty wild. Not to mention the fact, how much hype there is still surrounding Chimaev from his, burst onto the scene, starting the UFC, and It's just not been the same over the last 2.5 years. It all started with that UFC 279 incident. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Until he gets back in the good graces of fans, he just has not been the same fighter, I don't think. So
No. All right. Well, since we've been talking a lot about Middle Eastern fighters, and Zan, we did talk about Islam Makhachev, and obviously Islam is one of the proteges of Khabib Nurmagomedov, the former undefeated lightweight champion. Well, we're going to talk about another Nurmagomedov because it's time for our previews. We got 3 big fights, 2 big cards this weekend, 3 big fights, 2 on one on the other. Bellator San Diego. Main event, Zan. Bellator lightweight title on the line. Finally, we get this. Usman Nurmagomedov taking on Alex Zabili. It's a shame it's not for the Grand Prix title, but unofficially a Grand Prix final.
Yeah, unofficially a Grand Prix final, and arguably the best Bellator card of the year, at least in my opinion, the best Bellator main event of the year. You've been excited about this fight for over a year and a half. There's been a lot of, just bad blood and controversy brewing from this. This fight should have happened a year ago. It's happening now. I can't wait.
Yeah, I can't wait either. And everything aside with what's going on, I know you might have a little bit of a bias in your pick. Considering that a couple weeks ago I had my bias, but I think for as much as Zabili is a talented MMA fighter, and what we said a couple of weeks ago, and this is not one of those rare exceptions, but it's sometimes hard to pick against Nurmagomedov because Usman has looked like he's coming into more some of the Nurmagomedovs of today. I say today when Khabib only retired 4 years ago, but they're more complete fighters at this point, and Usman is really turning into a complete package. And I don't think that differs in this fight. I think Usman's the better fighter. I think it's going to be a clear all-around, victory for him, unanimous decision win over 5 rounds. He keeps the title.
Yeah, I think so too. And obviously to add to that, I just think when you look at Usman Nurmagomedov's resume, it speaks for itself. I mean, he's fought veterans of the sport. He's fought Bellator mainstays. He's fought former UFC champions. And this is no disrespect to Zabili, but when you've got a Nurmagomedov family that's essentially perfect in everything that they do in every aspect of MMA, where they just simply don't lose. I don't know. Oh, you could say that Usman Nurmagomedov doesn't walk into San Diego with a chip on his shoulder and wins a pretty easy decision. I'm gonna go with you, and this is no disrespect to Zabili, but I just feel like that pent up anger, the pent up frustration that this isn't for the $1 million Grand Prix could come back to fight him, and he could simply underperform. So for those reasons alone, I'm picking Usman. So
for sure. Bellator San Diego actually also has a contenders fight on it. Lorenz Larkin, Levon Shekeli. This is like, Sam, is it just me, or is this like the 3rd number 1 contenders fight at welterweight Bellator has done this year?
That's how it feels to me.
It's like welterweight and middleweight really are the big focus with these contenders fights. But anyways, you do have Larkin, obviously a Bellator veteran since coming over to Bellator from the UFC. I think that was 2017. Levon Shekeli, 4-2 in Bellator. He's coming off of a knockout of Sabah Homasi last year at Bellator 299. One of his losses in Bellator. He went 1-2 to start his run. One of those losses was submission loss to Goti Yamauchi, which, as you mentioned, Sam, before we started recording, that's not a bad loss. Shekeli's got some good momentum, and obviously Larkin is an older fighter, but Larkin has only lost one of his last, it feels like, 8 or 9 fights. And even at 38, Sam, the way that he's performing, the way that he's winning, it's really hard for me to go against Larkin. It's one of those things where it's like, he's earned an opportunity for a contenders fight, and I can't really pick against him until I see him get bested. He did get best once, but I still like he rebounded in his last fight.
Tom, you make a great point. Outside of the Koreshkov loss, his last loss, you have to go all the way back to September of 2017 against Paul Daly. It's unbelievable.
Right. And that's not a bad loss either, Paul Daly. So at this point, I see Larkin winning and getting a title opportunity.
Yeah, I'm going to say Larkin gets a late 3rd round TKO finish. I think that Jacoby gives him the best fight he can. I think he hurts him a couple times. he maybe tries to go in for the finish early, but I think that Larkin's wrestling dictates the pace, and I think he gets a late TKO finish with maybe like a minute to go or something like that. In a very
Something like that.
in a very exciting fight, but in a fight where Larkin has total control for the final like 10 or so minutes and gets a late stoppage there against a guy that I think quite frankly, given that they have that they have some common opponents between them, would be considered a good win.
Probably, yeah. And then, of course, on the UFC end, they've got Apex. 4 Apex's cards left. Main event for this one, Gilbert Burns versus Sean Brady.
Yeah, this is a fight that's been confirmed for a couple of months now. First, it was leaked. Gilbert Burns said to wait on it. The contracts hadn't been signed, and then a few weeks later, the fight was finally made. A rare Apex card that's actually good and funny. Speaking of UFC, at the time that we're recording this, ESPN has just dropped a fire promo in the middle of the Florida State Boston College game, teasing UFC 306. So if you didn't know that the Spirit was close to being on the way, back to this current weekend's fight, a very, very huge fight, as I kind of alluded to in the rankings. I'm pretty sure this is number 6 versus number 8 at welterweight, a huge fight. Gilbert Burns is looking to get back in the title picture. Sean Brady, no question about it. This is obviously the biggest fight of his career. I feel like this fight is a coin flip fight, and to me, just taking a look at this fight holistically, to me, it is absolutely amazing with the names that Gilbert Burns has fought. You don't mean to tell me that he's going into the Apex in Las Vegas as an underdog. That was a big surprise to me. What did you think?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a surprise. And Zain, honestly, I read a comment on, it's not cage fighting on YouTube.
Yes.
I read a comment on one of their posts about, it was a poll asking for a prediction about this fight. And somebody said that basically they're going to go with Brady because momentum matters in this sport. And Sean Brady's got momentum. Gilbert Burns has lost quite a bit of momentum ever since losing his title shot against Kamaru Usman back in 2021. And Zain, that's a fantastic point. I mean, Burns has beaten Stephen Wonderboy Thompson since then, but what is Stephen Wonderboy Thompson at this point? He had a great fight against Chimaev, but he's lost. Gilbert Burns has lost a little bit of a step, and I think Sean Brady is on such an up that if he wins, then we're talking about Sean Brady in the top contenders portion of welterweight. And if Burns loses, I don't know where he goes from here.
I'm gonna have to disagree with you a little bit. I don't think coming off of a win against an aging Kelvin Gastelum is all that impressive. And to also counter you on a little bit of a different point, you kind of alluded to that Gilbert Burns has not been the same fighter, who since his last win against Jordan Masvidal. Last I checked, he lost to the current UFC welterweight champion. That's no slouch there. And he also lost to one of the biggest rising stars in the division in ADM. So I think, given where Burns is at in his career, his last 2 losses are nothing to sneeze at. Those are 2 of the best fighters in the world. And
his last 2 losses are nothing to sneeze at, but if he doesn't win here, is that not a concern that it's 3 in a row, 4 of last 5?
Oh yeah, it's definitely a concern that if he loses, but given where Burns is at this point in his career, in my opinion, this is a fight that Burns should win on paper. I think this is one of those fights where Sean Brady is a surging welterweight contender, and this is arguably the biggest name that Sean Brady's ever fought outside of fighting the current outside of fighting the current champion, if you will. And to me, I just think it's one of those things where I feel like people are writing Burns off because of 2 losses. And to me, I don't think he should be the underdog in this fight. I think he should be favored because I think his resume is just exponentially better than Brady's. But that's just me, though.
I think it will be a close fight, competitive fight. I see this one going 3 rounds to 2 either way, but I'm going to lean to Brady.
Interesting. Would you and how do you think that Brady wins in your opinion?
I just said 3 to 2. I think it's a decision.
Oh, 3-2 is what I meant to say was 3-2 is in 49-46 or 40-47.
48-47.
Okay, it's so you think it's a relatively close fight. I'm gonna go the other way and take Burns by split. But either way, this to me has a chance to be one of the best non-title fights of the entire year. And you could argue that this is probably the strongest Apex main event that's still remaining. So it's good to see.
It's felt like a while.
Yeah, it's felt like a while since you got this good of an Apex main event. It's disappointing that it's not in an arena, but to have the spot it on you, to have ESPN/ESPN Plus on you, nothing really to sweat at. There should be a solid main event. A few news and notes regarding this card, so you guys know just some of the particulars here. It is taking place this Saturday. It's an ESPN Plus exclusive, starting at 4 p.m. Eastern. And knock on wood, assuming all goes well, 13 fights on the card. We're not really going to have time to preview some of the other ones. But Tom, do you think that this is the strongest Apex card of the entire year on paper? What do you think?
Like I said, it's been a while. I think this is one of the more recent strong ones. I'd have to think back to some of the ones from the start of the year, but it's definitely one of the strongest. And I mean, I am happy that it seems like they're going out with, the Apex before the renovations, with a couple of strong main events. You got Burns Brady, you got Tyra fighting next month against Brandon Royval. And it just was announced before we started recording, Zan, that November 9th, that UFC Apex 100 card is going to be headlined by the former flyweight champ Brandon Moreno taking on the returning Amir Albazi.
Yeah, that's going to be amazing fight. And you just hit the nail right on the head. UFC Apex 100 right before the renovations. That's a fight that people are excited about. And as you know, there's going to be another important flyweight title fight, which you just mentioned on October 12th. So the flyweight division, in all respects, is going to have some movement before the end of 2025. So for those of you who are fans of the trend hashtag save the flyweights, they're gonna get some movement. That's for sure.
Hopefully by the time the UFC Apex closes for renovations, we have a little more clarity on who Pantoja's next title challenger is going to be.
1000%, absolutely.
And before we go, how is this potentially going to be a thing, Zan?
I don't know.
Is Affliction coming back from the dead and becoming a boxing promotion?
I don't know. According to the Full Violence post, it's going to be in what's called RCC Boxing, if I'm mistaken, and it's being reported by Russian outlets that this fight is in the works. Just to put it simply, it's not 2008 anymore. We don't need to see this again. This may be an Anderson Silva Chael Sonnen situation where it may be only available, at least in this case, on Russian TV, and that might be the only way that you could possibly see, because I don't know a single person in the world, not even myself, and you know that I paid for some goofy pay-per-views in the past. I won't even buy. It's when there's no way. There's no way. And this fight, A, is two old legends, and B, does not make sense for where they are in their careers. They do not need to be competing anymore. We as longtime combat sports fans, we do not deserve Fedor Emelianenko versus Andrei Arlovsky over 15 years later. We just simply don't deserve it. That's going to wrap it up for episode 97. Just quickly before we get out of here, be sure to like and subscribe to the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. It's very much appreciated, as he just eclipsed 860 subscribers fairly recently. To do so, go to youtube.com/ETB Network. It's very much appreciated. And again, you who can listen to the MMA Outsiders wherever you get your podcast. That includes Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Acast, YouTube Premium, and so much more. And of course, we would be remiss if we did not thank our very good friends over at Playback for sponsoring this show and every other show across the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, as they will be being put to work later on this fall. That's going to do it for episode 97. For Tom, that's hitting to my left, I'm Zan. This has been episode 97, and we will see you next week for the major Noche UFC 2, aka UFC 306 preview, as we are inching closer and closer to 100 episodes. We will see you guys soon. Have a good one.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.